Two worlds, one you can see, and one that sees you. The supernatural realm is real, it's close, and sometimes it crosses over. When it does, nothing is ever the same. America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers, Marianne Paul, is here to take you straight into the shadows. This is Real Ghost Chatter. True tales from the other side. Let's begin.
Welcome to Real Ghost Chatter. I'm Marianne Paul, and today's episode takes us across the Atlantic to a small village in Essex, England. To a path lined with old yew trees that people have called the Nun's Walk for more than 160 years. A rectory once stood there. It was called the most haunted house in England. Researchers investigated it for decades. Families fled it. A woman left messages on its walls pleading for prayers. And no one ever determined where those messages came from. The rectory burned down in 1939 and was demolished in 1944. Yet, the nun is still seen on that path. This is the story of Borley Rectory. To understand Borley Rectory, you have to understand the ground it was built on. Borley sits on the border of Essex and Suffolk in eastern England, a place of flat farmland and old hedgerows. It's the kind of landscape that hasn't changed much for centuries. Long before any rectory existed there, the land carried a story. According to local legend, a 13th century Benedictine monastery once stood on that site. Nearby was a convent. And sometime during those medieval centuries, a monk from the monastery and a young nun from the convent fell in love. They made a plan to run away together. They were caught. The punishment was severe. The monk was hanged on the monastery grounds. The nun was brought back to the convent walls and sealed inside them, alive. It was the kind of story that does not leave. It's the kind of story that is passed from one generation to the next, until no one can remember when it was not simply part of where they lived. Reverend Henry Bull built Borley Rectory on that same land in 1862. It was a large red brick Victorian house built to hold his family of 14 children. He chose the site without apparent concern for the old stories. But the old stories did not wait long to find him. The first reports came in 1863, the year the rectory was built. Local schoolchildren began talking about a figure they had seen on the grounds. They reported seeing a nun moving along the path by the yew trees at the edge of the garden. For the Bull family, life in the rectory meant growing up alongside these sightings. Guests would ask about the woman walking in the garden. Visitors who had not been told any ghost stories, who stood at a window and wondered who the gray figure was. Some of the Bull children said they saw the nun regularly. Others who grew up in the same house said they saw nothing unusual at all. But the nun was not the only thing reported. The family also described seeing a phantom coach drawn by two headless horsemen, rolling silently across the property. And the nun herself was sometimes seen inside the house, not just in the garden. At some point, Reverend Henry Bull had a window in the dining room bricked up. His reason, according to family accounts, was straightforward. The nun had been peering in at them during meals, and he had decided he would rather not look back. The sighting that became part of the permanent record happened on July 20th, 1900. 4 of Reverend Bull's daughters were walking home from a garden party on a summer evening that was still light enough to see clearly. As they crossed toward the house, they saw a slight figure in gray on the path, moving slowly under the yew trees, head bowed. All 4 sisters called out to her. The figure did not pause or turn. It simply continued a slow walk and faded into the shadows of the trees. The women were obviously not frightened into silence. They stood in the evening light and called to the figure, and it simply could not, or would not, hear them. Reverend Henry Bull died in 1892. His son Harry continued as rector. Harry was said to have been more amused by the hauntings than troubled by them. He would reportedly tell people he was going to commune with the spirits when he retired to the garden. Harry Bull died in 1927. The rectory sat empty for 18 months. Reverend Guy Eric Smith and his wife moved into Borley Rectory in 1927. They were practical people. They had not come looking for a haunted house, and they did not want one. Within weeks, the rectory bells began ringing on their own. Ghostly lights appeared in windows of empty, unlit rooms. Footsteps moved through the halls at night when no one was walking. Then Mrs. Smith found the skull. It was in a cupboard in the kitchen, wrapped in brown paper. It was a human skull. There was no explanation for how it came to be there, and no record of it anywhere in the house's history. The Smiths contacted the Society for Psychical Research. A newspaper ran a story. The story brought Harry Price. The Smiths, who would later describe their time at Borley as the darkest period of their lives, left in July of 1929 after less than 2 years. Harry Price was the most prominent paranormal investigator in England. He had built his reputation in part by exposing fraudulent mediums, which gave his endorsements of genuine phenomena considerable weight when they came. He arrived at Borley Rectory in June of 1929 and, within his first visit, began documenting what the families had been living with for decades. Keys flew out of locks. Stones dropped from the air in sealed rooms. Temperatures dropped sharply in certain areas of the house. A glass appeared from nowhere on the staircase. On one occasion, Price and his team witnessed a brick levitate in midair and photographed it. The photograph became one of the most debated images in the history of British paranormal research. Price documented everything. He was meticulous about dates, witness names, and circumstances. And what he documented pointed to a house that had been quietly accumulating phenomena for more than 60 years. A new rector was appointed, and what followed would become the most intensely documented period in the history of Borley Rectory. If these true stories stir something in you, you might want to explore what happens when the supernatural meets the world we live in every day. My Raven's Cove Iconoclast series does exactly that. 6 books of supernatural thriller fiction, rooted in faith and the very real battle between light and darkness. Start with Raven's Cove and meet Kat Melbourne, a woman who discovers that some things cannot be explained and cannot be ignored. Find the full series on Amazon or visit me at marianpaul.com. Reverend Lionel Foyster moved into Borley Rectory on October 16, 1930, with his wife Marianne and their young adopted daughter Adelaide. Foyster was a methodical man. He kept a diary and he dated his entries. He described what he observed without embellishment. He eventually compiled his notes into an unpublished manuscript he called 15 Months in a Haunted House. The Foyster period produced more than 2,000 documented incidents over 5 years. Windows shattered without cause. Bells rang on their own. Stones and bottles were hurled across rooms, with Marian as the repeated target. She was struck multiple times by objects that arrived from no visible source. On one occasion, she was thrown from her bed entirely. The couple's young daughter, Adelaide, was locked inside a room with no key on the outside and no way to explain how the lock had engaged. Adelaide was also, on at least one recorded occasion, attacked by something her parents could not see or name. Foyster wrote in his diary only that it was something horrible. Reverend Foyster attempted twice to conduct an exorcism of the rectory. Both attempts failed. During the first one, he was struck hard in the shoulder by a stone the size of a fist. Then the writing appeared. Messages began appearing on the hallway walls, written in a childlike, unsteady hand. They were addressed directly to Marianne. Marianne, please help get. Marian Light Mass Prayers. The handwriting matched no one in the household. The messages kept appearing, sometimes in rooms Marian rarely entered. Some were scrawled across plaster while others appeared on scraps of paper. Still others seemed to be incomplete, as though whoever was writing them had been interrupted mid-thought. These writings did not threaten or plead. They asked for light. They asked for prayers, for praise, and for a mass. In May of 1931, the activity had become so relentless that the Foysters temporarily left the rectory just to rest. When they returned, a friend named Dom Richard Whitehouse, a Catholic priest, came to investigate. He documented what he encountered and described an atmosphere of heaviness and oppression unlike anything he had previously experienced. After a séance of exorcism was conducted in January of 1932, the phenomena did diminish significantly but not entirely. The Foysters remained until October of 1935, when Reverend Foyster's deteriorating health made it impossible to continue. Foyster died not long after leaving. After the Foysters left, the rectory sat empty again. The succeeding rector was given permission to live elsewhere. It seems no one wanted that house. Harry Price leased it in May of 1937 for 12 months and mounted a formal investigation. He recruited 48 unpaid observers who were academics, professionals, and researchers. They worked in rotating shifts to keep the house under continuous watch. Among his lead investigators was a man named Sidney Glanville. His daughter Helen conducted séances separately in London during this same period, using a planchette to attempt contact with whatever presence was centered at Borley. During one of these sessions, a spirit identified herself by name. She said she was Marie Lairre. She had been a nun in France, she said, at a convent near Le Havre. She said she came to Borley at the age of 19. She had broken her vows and left the convent to marry a man named Henry Waldegrave, a member of a wealthy English family whose estate had once occupied the land where Borley Rectory now stood. She said this had happened in 1667. She said her husband had strangled her, that he had buried her remains in the cellar. The Canon W.J. Phythian-Adams, a serious churchman who reviewed the séance transcripts, investigated the claims independently and concluded that Marie Lairre's account was consistent with the historical record of the Waldegrave family and the land. He could not prove it, but he could not dismiss it either. Then, during a final séance on May 20th, 1938, a different voice came through. It identified itself as Sunex Amures. It said the house would burn that night at 9 o'clock. When it burned, the proof of the murder would be found in the ruins. The house did not burn that night. Price's lease ended. The rectory was purchased by a retired Army officer, Captain William Hart Gregson, who moved in with his sons in December of 1938. He reported minor phenomena, nothing alarming. Then came February 27, 1939. Captain Gregson was unpacking crates of books in the hallway. An oil lamp tipped over. The fire spread quickly through the old timbers of the unelectrified house. A neighbor standing outside watching the blaze reported seeing a woman's figure in an upstairs window, standing in the flames. Witnesses in the days that followed described seeing strange shapes that appeared and then vanished as they moved through the smoke and ruins. The séance prediction had named that specific night 9 months earlier. The fire came 11 months after the prediction, not on the night named, but the prediction had been made. The insurance company examined the scene and suspected arson. Captain Gregson was never charged. In 1943, Harry Price excavated the cellar of the ruined rectory. Beneath the cellar floor, in the earth, he found bone fragments. He found a jawbone and at least one other piece. Medical examination indicated they came from a young woman, estimated at around 30 years of age. The parish of Borley refused to allow the bones to be buried in their churchyard. The local opinion, stated publicly, was that the bones were those of a pig. In May of 1945, nearly 80 years after the rectory was built, and an unknown number of centuries after the murder was said to have happened, the bones were given a Christian burial at Liston Churchyard in the next village. The rectory ruins were demolished in 1944. If the hauntings had ended with the building, the story might have faded, but the sightings continued. In October of 1949, 2 witnesses signed a written report describing a black figure crossing the ground near where the rectory had stood. It moved quickly and silently toward the small door of Borley Church across the road and vanished. A local doctor reported seeing a stooping, nun-like figure in the road between the former rectory site and the church. A 14-year-old boy who lived nearby claimed to have seen the ghost nun on 3 separate occasions. His uncle reported seeing the same figure on the Nuns' Walk one August afternoon in 1953. Ed and Lorraine Warren visited Borley Church during a trip to England in the 1970s. They came specifically because of ongoing reports of a ghostly nun seen walking the churchyard at night. By their account, they encountered the apparition themselves. Reports have continued into the present century. Investigators in 2021 recorded unexplained voices in the churchyard. In 2022, shadowy figures and unexplained lights were observed near the ruins. Whatever was at Borley does not appear to be finished with that place. There is something in the Borley story that I keep returning to. Whatever appeared on those walls did not threaten. It did not warn of disaster. It did not perform for investigators or destroy property to make a point. It asked for mass. It asked for light. It asked for prayers. And the bones, when they were finally found, were given exactly that. A Christian burial in consecrated ground after decades of waiting. After the parish of Borley refused and dismissed the remains as unworthy. After years of the bones sitting in a box. Another village, another churchyard, finally said yes. Whether you believe in lingering spirits or not, there is something worth sitting with in that detail. That the act of prayer, the act of burial, according to the faith, those things mattered enough that someone felt compelled to ask for them. In broken handwriting on a darkened wall, again and again. The Psalms tell us that God is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. Whatever the full truth of Borley Rectory may be, I find myself drawn to the possibility that at least one entity that lingered was not malevolent but grief-torn. A grief that did not know how to stop asking until someone finally answered. That verse is Psalm 34, verse 18, and I will leave it with you today. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Until next time, stay curious, stay faithful, and never mistake the darkness for the whole story.
The supernatural world is closer than we think. Sometimes it chills us. Sometimes it reminds us we were never alone. 2 worlds, every single day. And the greatest power against the darkness has always been the light. Stay curious, stay faithful, and never mistake the darkness for the whole story. Thanks for listening. Until next time, may the sun always be on your face, the wind at your back, and the good Lord walk beside you.